Understanding and Integrating the Emotions with St. Thomas Aquinas, Dr. Conrad Baars, and Dr. Suzanne Baars. Today on The Simple Truth, we consecrate everything to the Sacred Heart of Jesus through the Immaculate Heart of Mary and the pure, strong, chaste heart of St. Joseph. I'm your host, Jim Havens, and our guest today is Dr. Suzanne Baars. She's a licensed professional counselor and marriage and family therapist with a private practice in Irving, Texas. Sue is also the daughter of the late Dr. Conrad Baars, a psychiatrist, author, and pioneer in the field of Catholic psychology. His work is based on that of St. Thomas Aquinas. You can learn more at baarsinstitute.com. Dr. Conrad Baars is also the author of Feeling and Healing Your Emotions. A Christian psychiatrist shows you how to grow to wholeness. And that is where we're going to be going today, what we're going to be discussing today. Dr. Sue Baars, welcome back to The Simple Truth. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me again, Jim. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. A great blessing to have you with us for sure. And this book was originally published in 1979, and you edited, revised, and reprinted it in 2003. Why does this book hold up after all these years, and how much of it needed revision?
Well, I'll answer the second question first. It really didn't need a ton of revision. The only thing that we did was update some language because of the change in language in the mental health field. So we thought that would be helpful to people. But I think it's held up simply because it holds so many perennial truths about the human person and about our emotional life, especially as Christians. So it's not even just written for Catholics, it's written for any Christian person who wants to really live a joyful life where they feel more spontaneous and they can live more effortlessly. And it gives a lot of information in a question and answer format so that people can go to different topics. They can look in the index and see, what do I need to know about scrupulosity? How is that related to my emotions? What do I do about that? Or OCD, or just emotions in general. So I think it's just something that people always have such an interest in. And it's a very popular book, and I use it in my practice just to point people to different chapters because it has so much information that helps them to grow and to heal.
Yes, yeah, it's such a great book and really a reference that you can go back to time and time again. There's always more to learn from it because it really is for everybody, because it's a laying out of how we as human beings, as human persons really work, how our emotions function, how they're meant to be integrated into the whole person, stuff that we're not normally taught too much about, but we ought to be. This is obviously essential, and the book really gets to that point. In chapter 2 on emotions, we see this theme that carries through the book. It's stated this way at one point. It says, what emotional maturity really entails, and everything else about your emotions you should have learned when you were a child and adolescent, but nobody ever told you. And so this is what it's getting after, right? What we've not been told, what emotional maturity really entails. And then a little bit later in the chapter, it reads, quote, a truly mature existence demands a harmonious integration between emotions, thinking, and willing. Only then can we experience to the fullest the joy for which we are created. It is the absolute psychological foundation for the abundant life Jesus has brought us. End of quote. So the stakes are very high here, but this is unlikely to have been handed on to us, as it is unlikely that it was ever rightly handed on to our parents. So we're blessed to have you here to help us to receive it today. Where would you like to begin to help us to see the mature, harmonious integration between emotions, thinking, and willing that each of us can and ought to achieve?
Yes, I know. I think that's a great point to start with. I would say everything that my father and his colleague Anna Terua did was based on the anthropology of St. Thomas Aquinas. And when we use that term, I oftentimes like to just explain what it means, because nowadays anthropology means something else. It means like a study of ancient peoples or whatever. And in philosophical terms, in St. Thomas Aquinas's terms, anthropology simply means the study of what it means to be a human being, to be a human person. And so he's not talking about necessarily all the physical aspects of being a person, but he's talking about what's the difference, the unique difference based on, and he comes from Aristotle and some other philosophers. But what is the difference where we become a human person when we think about things, when we have free will, and then we also have what he called the passions, and we now call the emotional life. And he said it's really important to know what the order is. In fact, when I talk to psychologists or counselors, I'll always ask them, how many of you have had a course in abnormal psychology? And they'll all raise their hands, and I'll say, well, how many of you have had a course in normal psychology? And they all look at me and educate counselors on what does this integration mean? And St. Thomas talked about how the intellect, or our mind, rightly informed by reason, and our will are there to guide the passions. In fact, one of the main tenets of what he says in the Summa about the soul, about the psyche of the person, is he says it is the nature of the passions to be guided by reason. So he's really saying that the emotions, in our very nature, how God has created us, they want to be guided by reason. Now, a lot of people might be listening and saying, well, gosh, there's a lot of things that I want to do that I know I shouldn't do. Well, it doesn't mean that we don't have those times, also because we live in a fallen state, and our nature has fallen because of Adam and Eve's sin. However, in our nature as created by God, our emotions are set really to want to be guided by reason, even if we say no to gratifying them. That's actually that's an ordered way of living. So we can say yes if it makes sense, or if what we want, let's say, or what I want to do, or what I love, and I want to eat something that I know it's okay for me, so it's reasonable, or I know that my reason says, yes, this is a moral thing to do, or then I may do it if I wish to. Or in other cases, some things I have to evaluate and say, well, this wouldn't be good, even though it's a moral thing, or it's okay, or it's practical, but it wouldn't necessarily be good for me in today, or in my state of life, or whatever. Or even civil law would be something that where our reason would say, well, I can go 100 miles an hour down the road, but it says, the speed limit is 50. So I could take a chance and get pulled over or have an accident, but my passions have a role to play, but my reason ultimately needs to be able to say in a good way, yes or no. And a lot of times what people have been taught, or sometimes it's not even taught directly, it's been taught indirectly by what they've experienced maybe in their home or with other people, or maybe at school. Like they've seen people get angry with each other, and they came to the conclusion, I never want to be like that because it's really scary, or people get hurt, or I got hurt because of that. And so they start saying to themselves, well, I'm not going to feel like that, or I'm not ever going to be like that. And so what we really want to do, any really good therapist wants to be able to say the emotions actually have a role to play in our lives, where we actually can be we can lead happy lives. And that's really the main focus of the Summa that St. Thomas wrote, is that it starts with that, is that we are made for happiness, ultimately with God in the next life, but also here on earth. And so it doesn't mean at every moment I'll be happy, but we need to know the order, so that the order of who I am as a person, and I need to do things in a reasonable manner. But at the same time that I can experience the emotions, for example, of love, desire, and joy, as well as sometimes I'm going to feel hate or dislike and aversion to things, and then sadness if I can't avoid them. But those emotions that help us to feel joyful or content or satisfied are very important in helping us to know ourselves and to know how to make decisions about things. So they sort of integrate in a way like a horse and rider, where the rider represents reason and will, and the horse represents the emotions. And when you have a good education, so to speak, of the horse, with a lot of patience and a lot of allowing the horse to have its way, and not in a wild way, but like to harness that energy that the horse has, then the ride can be very pleasant. So the other thing that St. Thomas talks about, he says there's two different types of emotions. And my father called emotions psychological motors. And it's like they're the two different types of motors that we have. One is what we call the pleasure emotions or the humane emotions. And those are the ones I just mentioned: love, desire, and joy, and their opposites. And those emotions mainly are there, St. Thomas says, to tell us that they arise in us spontaneously, so that it tells us, oh, I perceive that this thing is a good thing for me, or it's not a good thing for me. And so it tells me something about myself and my relationship to that object or person or the idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, excellent stuff. Dr. Sue Baars is with us. We're talking about the book Feeling and Healing Your Emotions, a Christian psychiatrist shows you how to grow to wholeness, by Dr. Conrad Baars. Again, you can find it at baarsinstitute.com. So much we're going to dive into here today. This is just phenomenal stuff. And yeah, he defines it. Dr. Conrad Baars defines the emotions right here at one point in the book, saying emotions are psychic or psychological motors producing motion and energy to make life easier for us. They're supposed to help us, right? The emotions are good. They are to be integrated, rightly ordered. We're going to redeem this vision of the emotions today. As soon as we get back, stay tuned. Hey, just a quick friendly reminder, if you're enjoying the show, make sure to like it with the thumbs up and hit subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you so much for helping this channel to grow. God bless you. Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with Dr. Sue Baars, talking about Feeling and Healing Your Emotions, a phenomenal book by Dr. Conrad Baars. You can get it at baarsinstitute.com. That's BAARS Institute.com. Highly recommend it. And I want to just read a portion of the book here. This, to me, really gets at the heart of so much in this book, helping us to really understand and redeem this rightly ordered understanding of the emotions flowing from St. Thomas Aquinas through Dr. Conrad Baars and now Dr. Sue Baars to us today. Listen to this. He writes here, Dr. Conrad Baars writes in the book, if past generations had any idea that man's emotions are his friends and want and need to be guided by his reason, they would not have directed all their efforts and training methods at suppressing, if not completely eliminating, so-called mortifying them. It is true that we were taught that we must control our emotions by reason and will. However, this teaching often conveyed, if it was not explicitly stated, that you must control them, for if you don't, they'll cause you to sin. You must suppress your feelings at all costs. You can't trust them. If you don't mortify them, kill them, they'll get the upper hand. Telling a child over and over, you must control your emotions, especially in an atmosphere that suggests emotions do not want to be controlled and guided by reason and will, creates an emotional climate in which the emotions cannot develop toward maturity and integration with reason and will. Telling a child your emotions need and want to be guided and directed by reason, and we will help you to bring this about by our own example and sensible teachings, enhances the growth of the emotions and their ultimate integration with the higher faculties. The omission of this fundamental observation, and several other ones I shall mention shortly, from the masterworks of this 13th century philosopher have cost mankind dearly. For centuries, we have been wasting precious energy in promoting and enforcing a continuous battle between emotions and the higher faculties, instead of using this energy judiciously for the purpose of establishing an ever greater and ready state of cooperation and mutual support. For countless generations, the candidates to the priesthood were taught that above views of man taught that the above views of man in a rather dry, theoretical, non-practical, uninspired way, because the heart of Aquinas's anthropological philosophy had been left out by assumedly fearful, short-sighted secretaries or translators. It is not surprising then that in spite of the fact that Aquinas became the official teacher of the Catholic Church, a contrary philosophy prevailed and dominated the attitudes and pedagogy of leaders and educators in the Church. It is this philosophy that was at the root of most of the practices I referred to in an earlier chapter, practices, rules, and customs that led to much needless emotional and spiritual suffering. So this to me really gets at it, to get back to the true teachings of St. Thomas Aquinas on human anthropology, on the emotions, which have been either dismissed or maybe even wrongly understood. But this I think this very important distinction, right? That the emotions are good. They are to cooperate with reason and will, yes, and certainly the intellect is overall here. The right formation of the intellect is very important here to bring this all about. However, to think of it that way versus to think of it as, to the horse analogy that you mentioned in the first segment, which your father, Dr. Conrad Baars, does a great job of laying out at the end of this chapter, where instead of trying to raise the horse and ride the horse in cooperation so that you can run free, instead of that, to kind of not feed the horse and to beat the horse and to think the horse is working against me and all of this. This is not good. This is not the way we are to look at the emotions. And when you see it as it's laid out here and you start to understand it, what a help it is. That's why, again, this book is just so important. So grateful to have Dr. Sue Baars on with us. But what rises to the top for you as we think about this today?
Well, I think what you're saying is so true, because there's so many different misunderstandings of the emotional life, and people are trying to live their lives as good Christians, and they've had a bad pedagogy, or they, like I said before, they had a terrible example, so they decide to either repress their emotions or control them or avoid them, and they're always fighting with themselves. As you were speaking, Jim, I was thinking, it's a lot of times I'll give an example to illustrate why the emotions are good, and I'll say, every emotion is a physical feeling. Now, every physical feeling is not an emotion, like thirst or being sleepy or tired or hungry or whatever. But when we think about physical feelings, most of the time, I would say I'll say, well, do you know when you're thirsty? And do you know when you're hungry? And do you know when you feel dizzy or you're tired? And they'll say yes. And I'll just talk to them about, do you ever think that those are bad? And they'll sort of look at me strange. They'll say, well, no. Unless I'm going to overeat or oversleep or something like that. And I'll say, that's right, because those physical feelings are there to just, by nature, they just arise spontaneously to tell you something. And then you have to figure out, well, what am I hungry for? Or I'm thirsty. Do I want something hot or do I want something cold? What's the weather like? So that might affect what I want. Do I want ice in my drink or something or not? And so just in a parallel way, because emotions have a physiological component like physical feelings, but they also have this psychological component because they arise from interactions with other people, or from looking at a beautiful painting or something on a billboard, or a conversation or thoughts or something like that. They arise also spontaneously, and in themselves, they're really morally neutral. They are only there to tell us something. And so if we can learn to pay attention to them, they can be responded to in a very good way. And usually what they also do, what emotions do, people need to hear this, is that emotions will come. Sometimes they're very strong, but they will never stay there. They always eventually die down. And so a lot of times people are very afraid of their feelings because they think, well, if I let that feeling out, I don't know what to do with it. I don't know how to direct it. It'll be out of control. I'll be out of control. I'll be embarrassed. All these things, or I'll sin. Sometimes they actually think they are going to commit a sin by having certain feelings. And what they really need to realize is that, really, as I said, emotions as well as physical feelings are morally neutral. They can be taken up into something sinful, like if someone decides I'm going to eat like a glutton, well, that's considered a sin. That might need help. A person might need help to learn how to moderate how they eat. They can't get rid of eating. When people try to get rid of the desire to eat, it's called an eating disorder, right? So there too is a good example, because people need to have a good sense of, how do I learn how to moderate and respect this desire for food. And maybe I need to also learn, like, when I want to eat all the time, or I always feel like I'm hungry, well, am I bored? Do I have other emotions that I need to take care of in a good way? And in a similar fashion, we need to look at emotions that way too. They're just telling me something. It might not be correct. Just like when I'm hungry, I might not really be correct, because maybe I just ate an hour ago. Why would I be hungry now? Right? So I want to look at those things and to consider, well, what are my emotions telling me, if anything? And sometimes we won't know. We just have to simply respect them or sit with them and not act on them. Oftentimes they'll tell people, like, for example, if a person gets really angry, and they have to learn to moderate that, because they can ruin their relationships. Their children could be afraid of them. They could lose their job if they let it out in such a way that it could be hurtful, or it could be inappropriate. Example of road rage. Well, that's going to hurt them and or other people. And cost them money and all these things, or they could go to jail. But if they learn to notice those feelings, that feeling of anger, and to realize, okay, I'm getting more and more angry right now, or it just shot up like a volcano, and I just need to not say anything, or I need to remove myself from this situation, just to sit with it, to respect it, maybe to talk it out with someone else. And then when it naturally dies down, like I was saying, they oftentimes can look back the next day or hours later and say, boy, I'm sure glad I didn't say that to my spouse or my boss, because I was really angry, but now I understand the situation better, or now I'm in a better place to think through how I want to respond. And I'm glad I didn't say anything in the heat of anger. Now, on the other side of it, I was mentioning the pleasure or humane emotions before the break, and the other emotions that St. Thomas talks about, and he has different names for them than we're using. The other ones that we call the assertive drive, and those are hope and despair is its opposite. Courage and fear is its opposite. And then St. Thomas said there's a fifth assertive drive emotion, which is anger. And so those emotions are there to move us to act. They give you a lot of energy, just like the examples I was citing a minute ago. Gives you a lot of energy. Maybe you initially want to do something, but your reason is what has to decide, is this a smart thing to do? Or is this the time? Or am I too mad to actually say something and not hurt someone or ruin this? I need to wait and sit with this and let it die down a bit. It doesn't mean that my emotion will actually go away, but it may be at a place where I can consider, what's the best thing to do here? And sometimes the best thing to do, my reason says to me, is nothing. It's better that I leave it alone. We don't always want to gratify our feelings by expressing them. Sometimes we need to simply evaluate in a reasonable way through our intellect, is this practical? Is it moral? Is this a smart thing? Or should I just wait and just sit with it and see what I learn about myself and the situation over time? So my emotions help me, they help me to know, with the pleasure emotions, love, desire, and joy, what I experience as a good for me, or something that's not good, just in my feelings, like I want it or I don't want it. And so but then my reason has to evaluate, is it truly good for me, even though I want it? Because it might not be, right? But to say no to it does not mean that I'm getting rid of the feeling, but it will start to become quiet, because it's being guided by my reason and my will. And so I'm not just, this is all very different than what our secular culture teaches us, which is if I have an emotion of some kind or a feeling, then it tells me everything. And I should always gratify it, like in my actions. Well, we know there's many examples that we could cite that tells us this is not a very smart way to live. It brings a lot of unhappiness. It brings a lot of fear and tension. It can bring, I think, some people depression and even suicide. And they're making decisions based simply on their feelings without their reason and will being rightly ordered. So the reason and will being informed well help our emotions to be ordered well. And so then they can work together just like a nice spring and a fog.
Yes, yeah.
So
I'm going to give
one last thing I'll say is that
Sure.
emotions are a strength. It's a strength for us. It helps us to live and be ourselves. It actually is part of developing our own identity and knowing who I am and how I live, how I want to live, even a good Christian life.
Yes, we'll be right back. Stay tuned. Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with our guest today, Dr. Sue Baars. You can find her at baarsinstitute.com. A lot of great resources there, including the book that we're talking about today, Feeling and Healing Your Emotions by Dr. Conrad Baars. Again, you can get it at baarsinstitute.com. Sue, I want to throw an example at you. I've been pondering this some, and I think, again, helping to get at that distinction that I think is so helpful to say that, the emotions are not meant to be our enemy. They're meant to be our friend, and we're meant to have this integration, this cooperation going on between our emotions, our intellect, and our will. And here's a little example regarding this. So let's say that one is out and about, maybe running some errands or something, and they had planned as part of the day. They said, I'm gonna when I'm out and about, I'm gonna stop at the Adoration Chapel, spend a little time with my Eucharistic Lord Jesus. And have some prayer time there, and looking forward to that. So I'm going to do that while I'm out. Now they're out and they're doing various tasks, and they've kind of left the Adoration Chapel maybe for last. And as it would be time for that, and they're driving in that direction, they don't feel like going anymore. So their feelings have changed, and they feel like I'm not really. I feel almost an aversion at this point. I just want to go home, and so they could just right away go to, okay, I'm going to go home, and, why? And then start to think negative things maybe about themselves. Why am I so lazy all the time? Or I guess I don't really love God that much to not be able to do this today, or whatever it is. So that would be a bad outcome. That's not the right way to go about it. Another thing that they could do is to acknowledge the feeling. Yeah, I don't feel like going, but okay, I'm still going to go anyway. This is my commitment. I'm going to do it anyway. And they could go anyway. That's a little bit better. But I think the best would be, and this is what we're talking about here, this redirecting our emotions, is if we could acknowledge the emotion and say, I notice I'm feeling this way. I don't feel like going. That's interesting. I am a bit more tired now than when I made that plan. And, I'm actually starting to feel a lot of pressure too, that there's a lot of things that are waiting for me at home, a lot of work I have to do. And, I can see how that's weighing on me. At the same time, let me remind myself here. Let me try to redirect the emotion here, and let me remind myself why I was planning to do this in the first place. Because my time with God, my time there in that Eucharistic chapel today, that's actually my most important time today. And I want to be with him because I love him above all else. And as you start to remind yourself, as you start to give yourself those reasons again, the feelings start to change. And then you start to feel, you know what? I actually feel like I do want to go again. And then you go and then you're not working against the feeling, but the feeling has been rightly ordered by the intellect, reminding yourself the real reasons behind all of this. So that's just one example. But I think if we kind of think in these terms, then you do start to live differently. You start to notice your feelings, and you can be free to use your intellect to redirect your feelings in this way. Might not always work out perfectly. Sometimes you might just have to work against maybe something that you feel, because you're going to do the good regardless of your feeling. But anyway, any thoughts on that example? Anything else to say about that?
No, I think that's a great example, and I think it's true. I mean, I think we have to just sort of notice the feelings and respect them. Like, it's telling, my feelings are saying, I don't really want to go, but I know this is a good thing. And without having to chastise myself, or to think badly of myself, or to think that that's a sin. You didn't mention that, but I think sometimes people would probably feel that if they were scrupulous, or think that. But I think just to notice it, and to be able to sometimes make a decision despite that, which is fine. It doesn't mean that you're doing any damage to your feelings. It may not be what you want to do, but it might be a good thing to sort of have a conversation with yourself, in a sense, with those feelings, those parts of yourself, the part of yourself that says, I don't want to go, I'm too tired. It's like, well, I know I want to do this, in terms of I will do it, even though I don't want to do it at the moment. And I know that usually when I go, even though I'm feeling tired, the Lord always takes care of that in some way. Now, I would say sometimes we're going to go kicking and screaming internally, and we're not happy about it, and maybe it's not a great experience. But I think the great thing that we can remember at that time is the Lord is always going to do something for me, and with me, and in me. And I might not see it right away, but he'll use that time for somebody else. And it's important that I go. It's sort of like dealing with, as you were talking, I was thinking, it's like how we would help educate a child. And if we always let the child say, no, I don't want to do that, or I don't want to eat that, well, the child will never learn to eat the right things, or they will never learn manners with other people. They'll just sort of be wild, and they'll be very it'll be a problem, because they'll not be able to live with other people in a good way. So we want to be able to say to that child something in terms of, you're angry, aren't you? Or I can see that you're angry. And they're going to say, yes, I don't want to do blah, blah, blah. And you could acknowledge that and say, I see that you don't want to do that, but we are going to do this, and this is how we do this in our family, or this is how you and I are going to be today. Now, the child may not like that at all, but usually what I've seen is that if the child has some sense that the parent or the adult has their good at heart, that they might settle down once you give them a boundary, sort of like giving yourself a boundary and saying, I'm going to do this even though I don't want to eat my broccoli, or I don't want to go to adoration, or I don't want to really do X, Y, or Z. I don't want to talk to that person because I don't really care for them, but I'm going to do it anyway, right? So it's like I still am going to be in charge, and I want to help that child, or that part of me that's maybe being a little childish or a little petulant, to be able to say, no, this is what we're going to do, even though you don't like it. And so the child, hopefully over time, will see that this is not a bad thing, and that if I do this thing, I can have this little reward. And so the child actually can be sort of shaped and molded into a person who can relate to other people, but also has had his feelings affirmed, right? Because I started off by giving the example of, oh, you feel angry, don't you? Or I can see this in you. You really don't want to do that. Okay, but this is what we're going to do, or you give them a choice, for example. So you respect the feelings, but it also could be something like if they're doing something damage to their sibling or something in the house, you can say, it's okay for you to be angry, but you may not act like this. And so it's sort of the same with us. It's like, it's okay for me to not want to do this, but this, I'm actually committed to the Lord that I would go. And this is something that's important. Even though I'm really tired, I might have to take a nap in adoration, and the Lord will understand. So it's really, even in that, it's respecting the feelings in terms of, when I say that, it's not that I'm always going to act on it or do what I want to do. It's that I recognize that right now it doesn't appeal to me, but I know that it's the better thing to do, and I have time to do it, even though I'm tired, I'm going to make that decision. It doesn't necessarily mean I'm always going to do that. I'm not always going to, being a human being, I might not make that decision, but that's a possibility that I'm going to do something even though I don't feel like doing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Dr. Sue Baars.
Really,
yep.
Yeah, sorry. I was just going to say our Lord in his human nature in the Garden of Gethsemane did not want to go to the cross, but then he said, but your will, not mine, be done, right? Because that was a horrible experience that he was going to encounter, and he knew exactly what was going to happen, and he was afraid. And so, of course, he wanted to avoid that, but he decided he would.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you, Jesus. Yeah, Dr. Sue Baars is with us, baarsinstitute.com. And, we all want the right and good vision of this as we learn about it. It's beautiful, right? This is what we're made for, that we would have this, reach this level of emotional maturity in our lives, and that growing up, this would be handed on to us, and there would be really emotionally mature adults, parents around us that would be sort of feeding us in this way, because as Dr. Conrad Baars writes in the book here, he says that emotional food for you or me is actually the emotions of other people, what other people feel and share in such a way that it can be felt in the literal sense of the word by a child is the emotional food for his emotional life. The composition and richness of ingredients will determine whether or not the child will ultimately become emotionally mature. So certainly this vision doesn't all come fulfilled for all of us in any level of perfection. So different levels of experience we all have here, but that's another beautiful part of the book, lays out the truth of it all, and then it gets into the healing. So we don't have tons of time on the show today. I wish we did, to unpack it all, but what do you think is the most important to share with people today about really healing the emotions?
Well, there's a number of different things, and you're right. There's so much to say about that. I think that the quote that you were reading, where the emotional food is the feelings of other people, is a lot of people could probably hear that and misunderstand that. But it has to do with the innate need for every human being to be loved unconditionally by another person. And so just like we always every human being needs to receive food, shelter, clothing, education from outside of themselves, so too do they need emotional food. They need love from other people. And that comes through what my father and his colleague developed, this concept of affirming love or affirming presence or affirmation. And it's different than, it's not at all the same as what you hear nowadays, like gender affirming or affirmative therapy, or little affirmations, which are motivational phrases. Those are great. But I'm not saying that the affirmative therapy is, but affirmation is simply a way of being present to another person. And it's really a 3-step process. And the first step is that I am open and attentive and receptive and aware of another person. So I'm really there with them. I'm not thinking about other things. I'm not there to get something from them. The second step is, as I get to know them over time, I allow my feelings to be moved by maybe with delight or liking or if love. And so that I'm sort of getting to know them as a person. So it's not just a business transaction that's happening here. And then the third step is I have a choice to make, that when I have been moved by this person, I reveal how I feel, like my liking or my love for the person or my delight in the person, in my countenance, in my tone of voice, in my choice of words. Mainly, it's a way of being with another person. So it's a way of living in which I focus just on being present and being receptive. And what happens there is that over time, that helps to strengthen the person to be themselves. And in a way, like one of the examples I was giving just a little while ago about how you can educate a child to have their feelings, but also be themselves and also live in society and have manners, that is a way of affirming the child. like on the emotional level, like, I know it's okay. It's okay that you feel this way. And then intellectually is, but it's not okay for you to act this way. And so it helps the person to grow, and it helps the person to actually feel like they may be themselves. There's an example in another of my father's books, Born Only Once, The Miracle of Affirmation. And he talks about a childhood friend of his who was really affirmed by his mother and pastor by not being told he had to come out from under the table when he was shy. And after the pastor left, his mother said, "Were you shy, Johnny?" And he told my father that probably cured his shyness in itself, because it was okay for him to feel that way. So that's the way in which another person's feelings actually are the emotional food for us, so that we can actually grow into being ourselves. There's other ways too that I'll talk about of how a person who has not received that, or has repressed their feelings, can really help their emotions to grow, develop, so that they can catch up to be where they want to be, and to lead a happy life.
Wonderful. Dr. Sue Baars is with us, and we've got one more segment to go. Stay tuned. Hey, if you're looking for some help with your daily prayer, I want to offer you 3 powerful prayers to start each day. In fact, these are the 3 prayers I lead my family in as part of our morning prayer every morning. To get these 3 powerful prayers to start each day, just go to the link in the description, and I've got a great looking simple PDF page you can print out and even post it on your refrigerator like I do if you wish. I hope these prayers help you as much as they are helping me. Now back to the show. Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with Dr. Sue Baars. We're talking about healing your emotions, feeling and healing your emotions, a book by Dr. Conrad Baars. Today, you can get it at baarsinstitute.com. That's baarsinstitute.com. So in the last segment, Sue, you were sharing a bit about healing, and if somebody maybe hasn't had proper affirmation growing up, proper experience of unconditional love of another person towards them, what I think your father and yourself would describe as emotional deprivation disorder or syndrome, if it reaches that point. But regardless, wherever someone might be in need of some healing, what else can you share with us today?
Yes, I'd be glad to. The thing that I've found helps people the most, and anybody can do this, is to develop the emotions, and I've said it a few times, of love, desire, and joy. And they can do that by, I usually direct people just to think about hobbies they've had, or things they like to do, or maybe they used to like to do and they've gotten so busy they don't do them anymore. And I usually direct them to think about things that don't necessarily cost anything, like walking out in nature, not to get a lot of steps in, or, that's fine, but for the purpose simply to notice what is happening around them, like notice the breeze, or are they hearing birds calling to each other? Is it beautiful there? To just sort of soak that in and see how it affects them. Or they can go to something like a museum, or do something with the fine arts, or read a good book. One of the chapters in this book, Feeling and Healing Your Emotions, I think it's chapter 7, Healing Emotional Afflictions. My father gives a lot of examples of these kinds of things. And what it does when we do that, it helps the person, because they're not just thinking through everything. And a lot of times when they've come from dysfunctional families, or families where there's a lot of neglect, or they didn't get enough of what they really needed, they're constantly thinking about things and trying to figure out how to please other people so those people will like them, or they won't be mad at them. And so everything sort of has to go through their head, and they never really are able to just sit in their feelings, and the feelings actually are pleasant, and that they can enjoy life. And so what I'm trying to do is help people to see if they can start doing some of these things for themselves. What happens is they begin to not just have this big head that's thinking, and this little body that's not having a whole lot of feelings, We want to actually help people to think less and be more, feel more, so that there's more integration and more proportion with thinking and willing and feeling. So there's more of that integration, but there's a proportion there. And so when they can choose those things, all I want them to do is just to notice what feelings come up inside of them. They might not know what the name is for those feelings. That's fine. But we want those feelings to be pleasant and just enjoyable. And so that it's sometimes I'll say, when you do an enjoyable activity, you can sort of be taken up into that activity, not all the time, but sometimes, so much so that time passes and you can't believe it's been an hour and a half since you were playing, the guitar, or you were listening to music, or you were out in nature doing something, or you were, whatever it was. And those times are very refreshing. And what also happens is that people begin to experience the enjoyment of life. Now, people who have had trouble with their relationships may not want to start with being present to other people, because there's too much difficulty there in that respect in their lives. And so to do it with the fine arts or nature or scripture or a good book or whatever it is, it's really more of a safe area to start developing their emotional life. And it's not like you want to think your way through it. It's that you will want to do these things so that the emotions are naturally stimulated and you may feel these things and you begin to know, that's what I'm attracted to, or that's something that I don't want to have anything to do with. Well, this actually helps the person in concert with their reason and will. Eventually, when those things are well developed, they can actually make decisions more readily and not have to agonize over, well, what's the best thing to do? Because their feelings are readily available to them for them to say, there's something off with this car, or I just really don't like this aspect of it, or I don't like the color. But then they could say, well, as I really think about this car that I went and test drove, and I give it a few days and I think about it, the feeling that I want that car and I want to go check it out again, it's actually growing in me. Same with relationships. Like, we don't want to just jump into relationships and say, this is the one person I'm going to be with the rest of my life, even though some people know that right away. But you want to give that time so that those feelings can deepen, and so that actually the desire, if you notice the desire growing for the person, or for maybe it's an article of clothing, if you give it some time, you actually begin to see, I really do want that. Or sometimes the desire just goes away and you realize, I'm glad I didn't buy that, because I really didn't care for it that much. It really didn't move me that much. And so the emotions actually have a very nice role to play in helping our lives be more spontaneous and effortless, and actually can be very joyful. And we can take that into our spiritual life, not just in the way you were mentioning before, Jim, but just to be able to be open to, I would say, to be open to the Mass as you learn about the Mass, or as if people really know what is happening at the Mass, to be open to ask God for the grace to be moved with love for Christ and what he is doing for us on the altar during the Mass, but also just even in reading the Gospels, to really sort of see the story of Jesus Christ and to just let the feelings come if they come. We're not talking about forcing feelings. We don't force ourselves to feel love. This leads to one thing I also wanted to mention, and this has to do with correcting some of the misunderstandings that people have, or a bad pedagogy. And that is, for example, we are commanded by Christ to love our enemies. Well, who of us feels love for our enemies? That's why they're our enemies. We don't like them, or we don't like what they're doing. But he wasn't saying that in terms of feeling love for them. He was saying, really, the command has to do with to do good to them, or to wish to will the best for them, to be charitable to them, like maybe in my thoughts. Because if I don't, what I'm doing is I'm giving into my feeling, and I'm willing something bad for them, right? So then that is really against what the commandment is. But he's not saying that we automatically feel love or liking for someone who is our enemy and who has harmed us. Hopefully over time God can change that through his grace, but he doesn't always. And sometimes our feelings don't change. It doesn't, but the command is, I still need to be charitable. It's the same with hate. Sometimes I feel hate for something that someone is doing, and I can't really pull it apart from the person, because people will say, well, I have to love the person, hate the sin. And that is true, but that's more on the level of the will, that because my feelings I can't command. Just like I can't command myself to not feel hungry or not feel thirsty. I can only command that by saying, well, I'm going to take care of it. I'm going to sort of assuage it. But the feelings themselves actually help us to live a good life, a happy life, and a joyful life if we can just notice them and then sort of sit with them and see what they tell us. And sometimes we're going to have to think through it. And we call that, as a therapist, I call that sort of processing through what the person is thinking and feeling to find out what that's about. And so it's a simple process, but a lot of times it's very foreign to people. And so they just need some practice. And sometimes they need someone to talk through those things with them, and to affirm that those feelings are valid, even though they may not need to act on them or should act on them.
Yes, awesome. Dr. Sue Baars, baarsinstitute.com, the book, Feeling and Healing Your Emotions. You can get it there, baarsinstitute.com. Hey, just a quick friendly reminder, if you're enjoying the show, make sure to like it with the thumbs up and hit subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you so much for helping this channel to grow. God bless you.